Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. I hope everybody is doing very, very well and has had a great first half of your week. The weeks are flying by and we are now into the first week of September. So I guess you could say, we are moving into what we would call autumn here, what you guys would call the fall over in the United States, which is kind of slightly poetic sounding, slightly less austere sounding than we call it when we call it autumn. Anyway, don't know why that is, but it just is. It's just like, we use meters and kilometers and Celsius here, and you guys use a much older system. Don't know why, but it is what it is. So, yes, it has been a short week for you guys in the United States because you had Monday off because of Labor Day, which I have to admit, for most of my life, whenever I've thought about labor, I have thought about giving birth. I don't think it's related to that. I think it's related entirely to employment, and it's very nice that you guys get a public holiday recognizing your employment, which is great. So I hope everybody had a nice extended weekend. You saw me, or at least some of you saw me on Sunday. The rest of you were probably out drinking and partying and having a lot of fun. Dave says we tried to go metric. That was a disaster. Yes, probably because you don't understand how to convert centimeters into meters or something like that. I'm kidding. Dave got lost in AI. Oh, dear Lord. Yeah, you don't want to get lost down that little rabbit hole. There is no extracting you once you get lost in the world of artificial intelligence. So I wouldn't be going down there, to be honest. All right, so let's see who is here after I've done my little 5-stroke rough with a tap. We have Billy Morgan. We got Brett Marler, who is at rehearsal, so he's going to watch us later on. So thank you very much for dropping by, Brett. I appreciate it a lot. We've got Kyle Trajuziak. We've got Just Bob. That's hilarious. He says, "Hey there, Lipsters. Let's learn about broken structure, tying the impossible together lyrically, and rhyming the impossible. It's all on the table. Let's go." That's very cool. Thank you for that. Who else do we have? We got Don Oliver. We got Mixmaster here. We got De Loenzian. Sounds rather like Loens. And you've just renamed your channel. I'm not sure if that's the case, but if that is the case, that's rather an excellent renaming, rebranding of your channel. I like it. And we've also got the aforementioned Bops, who I mentioned, who is in New York. That is my good friend Dave. Who else do we have? And he actually says Labor Day should be for pregnant women. Yeah, I quite agree. I think that's it. So far, so good. We've only got 11 people here, but that's all right. I don't mind. I mean, this show tends to be a smaller audience anyway. But Mixmaster has some good news, which is, I like good news. So let's start the show with some really good news. So he says, finally got my Studio One licenses sorted back on 7 Pro for a year. Yay! Excellent. Congratulations. Welcome. Studio One Pro 7 is awesome. I personally, and I'm not speaking as a company employee here, I'm speaking purely from my own personal experience. I personally think that version 7 is the best, most comprehensive, most usable, user-friendly, efficient, solid, all of those words. I think it's overall the best version of Studio One that we have ever had. Without a question. I think it is definitely the best version of Studio One that we've ever had. Now, there have been some really, really great versions of Studio One. I think version 5 was was, ball out of the park, because it came loaded with so many surprises, like real amazing surprises that nobody had anticipated. There was a nice UI overhaul, and then there was, of course, the integration with Persona Sphere, as it was called back then. Now it's called Studio One Pro Plus, but back then it was called Persona Sphere, and it was brand new, and there was workspaces that were all brand new. Version 5, I think, was an amazing point in the development of Studio One. Version 6 is also fantastic because we introduced Dolby Atmos, which had been a very long-standing feature request. I think I had seen the whole Atmos thing being floated around, maybe in version 4. People were saying, hey, it'd be really great if there was Dolby Atmos support. And we finally did do that in version 6, which is great. I'm so glad we did it. And then with version 7, we've got the launcher, the clip launcher, which is great as well. I mean, it's not my thing particularly, or at least I didn't think it was going to be my thing. I just kind of was, I'll admit, I will be honest, and I will admit to you, the whole launcher thing, I thought, I'm not into dance music. I'm not into, the stuff that the Ableton Live people do. It's not my bag, not my thing at all. I'm a jazz guy. That's what I do. It's not that I dismissed it. I was just thought, it's never ever really going to be my thing. It's just going to be a feature that is great. It's great for those that are into it, and I'm glad we have it for those that are into it. Until I actually started playing with it. As soon as I started playing with that launcher, man, I found all sorts of incredible ways in which I could improvise with it. And I found all sorts of ways in which I could create different improvised scenarios and improvisation scenarios where I can trigger all sorts of different layers that are on loops. I can just trigger all sorts of different loops, and I can improvise over the top of them, and I can change the texture as I go, just simply by triggering something. And I suddenly discovered that actually I could actually create, kind of a jazz rhythm section over which I could improvise and be easily able just to trigger different sections just with a push of a button. And suddenly the whole idea of the launcher just exploded for me. And, I spent pretty much an entire day just playing with that thing. And suddenly I was just like, man, the launcher is amazing. I never thought it would be anything like anything I would ever do. And now it is. It's so weird. It's so funny. Did JL secretly change teams? Look at that shirt. Yes, it's a Fender shirt. I have a good number of Fender t-shirts. However, I'm going to let you in on another secret, and I don't normally let you guys in on secrets. Okay? I've been using Fender products for probably the better part of 40 years. I got my first Fender bass when I was 10. And I've been using Fender basses ever since. I just fell in love with that sound. I had a little flirt with Ibanez basses. Didn't like. I tried a Yamaha bass because I saw that John Patitucci played a Yamaha bass. Didn't like the tone. Didn't like the feel of the thing. Didn't like it at all. I went immediately right back to Fender, and I've been playing Fender ever since. Yeah, Billy, I've got a video on the launcher. It's in my Studio One 7 playlist. If you want to go check that out, there is actually a video dedicated to the launcher. So I don't actually need to do one. I actually have one. So I've been a Fender bass player for 40 years, and so over the years I have acquired Fender t-shirts. So most of my Fender t-shirts actually predate the PreSonus acquisition. So I happen to be wearing a Fender t-shirt right now, but I do have a bunch of PreSonus ones as well. But yeah, I'm wearing a Fender t-shirt. And actually, for me, on a personal note, the whole acquisition thing for me has actually been an incredible blessing for me, because it combines the best of two companies, the best of two worlds. I'm a bass player. I'm a Fender bass player. I use Studio One. I'm a Studio One fan. I work for PreSonus, and now I also work for the company that make my basses. And even better, the bass that I have, both the two jazz basses back there, you know, I have a staff discount, which means I can get my basses for half off, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, so Billy, I don't need to do a tutorial for the launcher because I already have one. And you know what? When I made that video on the launcher, it's only a few minutes long, but really, that was like a few minutes condensed out of about 2 hours of messing about with it. Because I was just having so much fun with it, I almost forgot that I'm supposed to be shooting a video. So I then had to edit 2 hours down to about 6 or 7 minutes. Because I thought 6 or 7 minutes is kind of reasonable for a video where I'm just showing one particular feature. I thought, yes, 6-7 minutes is probably about right. Just Bob says, how do you write a chord pattern that when played in reverse will still line up with the same chords played forward? That would be parabolic, I think, where the chord changes are the same forward as they are backwards. Yeah, that would be really hard to actually write, but it's not impossible. Yeah. Keith, go and take yourself outside. Seriously, dude? Oh my word. Go take yourself outside and give yourself a stern telling to. My word. When the reverse ends and the chords forward start playing. Okay, you've just kind of thrown a little wrench in there, Bob, with what you're talking about. Because you can make loops of chord changes very easily. When the reverse ends and the chords forward start playing. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean. I'm not really sure what you mean, to be honest. And would it really be practical to apply to an actual song rather than just a theoretical exercise? Because there are songs which I have started, for me, they have started out as a theoretical exercise. For example, and I think I've talked about this before, because it is actually a wildly silly concept to me. Anyway, there are other musicologists that would slap me around the face for saying what I've just said when I refer to hexachordal combinatoriality, which is a huge word of words that are just basically sellotaped together, which basically means taking 6 notes of one scale from six notes of another, and you put them together to make a 12-tone note row. So you're combining hexachords, or half of a scale. So if you take the first half of a G major scale and the second half of, I don't know, a B flat major scale, and you put the two together, that would be hexachordal combinatoriality. It's a massive word to say, take those notes from that scale, take those notes from that scale, sellotape them together to make a new scale. And so, yes, I think it's a silly idea, but I have written songs where it has entirely been based out of that concept. If you want to hear some very, very good examples of hexachordal combinatoriality, then check out the works of people like Berg, Webern, and Schoenberg from the 20th century German school, basically. Schoenberg was experimenting with things like 12-tone note rows, where each one of the 12 tones is not related to any of the other notes of the 12-tone note row. So basically, it's a 12-tone note row where each note must not have a direct relationship with another note in the 12-tone note row. So it takes a while to figure out what your 12 notes are going to be. And then once you've figured out what those 12 notes are going to be, that is where it's from that scale that you end up with, which we call a note row, because it's not really a scale. It doesn't have like relational functions within it. But that note row, you then derive your melody and your harmony, and therefore your chord changes from that note row. And one of the rules about melody writing using the note row is that when you've played a note, you have to play all the other notes before you can play another note. So if you play a G and that happens to be in your note row, you have to play all the other notes of the note row before you can play G again. And so you end up with some really interesting music. And it can sound completely non-tonal because it's meant to sound completely non-tonal. And that's kind of like the upper extreme of the hexachordal combinatoriality thing. But you can take the whole idea and make it entirely diatonic. So you can use a major scale or a minor scale. And you can combine two completely different scales and make them fit together, like C major with F sharp minor, for example. Or C minor, F sharp major. And take one half of one scale, one half of the other scale, stick them together. That's your note row. And out of that, you make your music. You write your melody, you derive your harmony and your chord changes. You treat it like a mode, basically. So that's what hexachordal combinatoriality is. It's a massive word to describe something that's really silly. And so, just Bob, to kind of get to your point, I have created pieces that have been entirely derived out of those kind of musicological exercises that at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to get to sleep and my brain says, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about if you took that chord relationship or that diatonic relationship with this non-tonal relationship, and you put the two things together and you juxtapose one against the other, and my brain starts working this stuff out. Those are my 3 a.m. songs, and some of them actually work out quite nicely, and I end up with something pretty cool. For example, there is a song of mine that is up on SoundCloud, and it's called Softly Spoken. And it's basically a brass band with a rhythm section. And it features a flugelhorn solo, not by me, but by my really good friend, Luke Richards. So if you want to go check that out on SoundCloud, it's there. But it's essentially a brass band and a rhythm section. The rhythm section was recorded in my flat where I used to live. And the brass band was recorded in the side hall of the church that we attend. But anyway, that was all based out of a particular musicological challenge I set myself. And it was a harmonic challenge. It was, could I make chords that are related, not directly in terms of functional harmony? Could I make those work together? So I gave myself one rule, one restriction, and that is all the chords must be related to each other by major thirds. Now, I could use 2-5-1s to navigate my way between these thirds related chords, and so that's kind of what I ended up doing. So if you want to check that out as an example of how you can make an entirely theoretical exercise into a really nice piece of music, go check that out. And you should be able to find it on my SoundCloud. And it is, I think it'll be fun. And Just Bob says it's kind of like how Hendrix used reverse guitar solos and made it sound like it fits, even though the reverse sounds mismatched and matched in spots. Why? This is simply because if you are working in a diatonic equal tempered system like the one that the vast majority of all popular music is based in, then you're going to get some notes that have a lot more tension than other notes. And some will fit really, 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 really well. Some will be exceptionally tense and exceptionally spicy. Now, the key here is going back to a principle that I have heard the bass genius Victor Wooten expound many, many times. And I actually, at a bass day, I think it would be 1997 bass day that he was at when I was down in London. He first this was the first time I'd seen him expound this proposition. And the proposition was, there is no such thing as a wrong note. There is no such thing as a wrong note. There is no such thing as a wrong chord, which is the next logical progression from there is no such thing as a wrong note. And so when I heard him talk about this and then demonstrate it with his guitar playing friend, I was like, of course. It was just completely logical to me. And so after the seminar that he had done was finished, some people kind of stuck behind, and they got like autographs from Victor, and I think it was Neil Zaza, the guitar player, and they got autographs and that kind of thing. And I just hung back and I waited for the crowd to kind of dissipate. And once the crowd dissipated, Neil had already packed up his gear and was heading off in the general direction of Starbucks. And so it was just me and Victor. And so, me being the musicologist, I basically said, hey, can we kind of talk about this, a little further, a little bit more whilst you're packing up your gear, if you don't mind? And he said, absolutely, I would love to talk about this more. He's just like, out of all those people that were here at the end getting my autograph and stuff, nobody actually wanted to talk about the thing that I just talked about. So he and I sat, once I helped him pack his gear, and once he packed his gear and kind of put it to one side, ready for what he was doing later on, he and I basically just sat down with a coffee and we talked for about 2 hours. Me and Victor Wooten, who is like a legendary, amazing bass player. He and I basically just sat and we talked for about 2 hours. And we talked about this whole principle of there not being such a thing as a wrong note. So, to get to your Hendrix point here, Bob, is the reason why some notes match and fit and some notes don't is because of the degree of separation between a note and its relationship. So either its note and its chord, or if the melody is just isolated on its own, the relationship of that note to the next note you play and the note that you played before it. Basically, the context in which that note appears. So there is always a context in which a note is played, either intentionally or unintentionally. And so the secret to good music making and good melody making is making sense between the note you've just played, the note you're going to, and then the note that's to come after that. That's kind of where, that's what you practice. That's what I practice when I'm improvising. I spent many hours just practicing how to play my scales and my licks as fast as possible. And I learned, maybe in the last 10 years, I've been going through a process of unlearning all of that. I've been going through this process to completely unlearn all of that and basically go back to learning how to shape a melody and how to shape an improvisation, so that instead of just, somebody takes a box full of fireworks and lobs a match in it and then stands back to see what happens, I want to actually put on a display that makes sense, that has a progression, that has tension and release, that has uh, that does have explosions, but also has moments of beauty, moments of just prettiness. You know, the great alto sax player and jazz pioneer Charlie Parker said that his pursuit of improvisation was not about speed. It wasn't about technique. It was about playing the pretty notes. And Miles Davis has something interesting to say at this point, which is to not play the butter notes. Never quite fully understood what he meant by that, but I think what he meant by that was to not aim to just, pour notes out of your instrument, but rather to be intentional about every single note, even when you're improvising. And so there is this element of music in which chance takes place. And there is, in fact, an entire late 20th, early 21st century music compositional school that I think that originated in France. I think Pierre Boulez would have had something to do with this in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and through into the 1980s and 1990s. And basically what this is the idea of music that takes place purely by chance. It's pure luck what sounds come out. And so in Pierre Boulez's case he was dealing with tape loops and electronics and that kind of thing. And so he was creating electronic instruments that would play random sequences of notes based on a particular set of rules that he had imparted to that machine. It would play random notes based upon that particular set of rules. And then, so that was kind of the electronics side of it. And from there, you get into kind of like German electronic music. And from there, you get into, Kraftwerk and, one of the great electronic bands, of which I am actually a fan, believe it or not. You probably think, hey, jazz guy, why is he a fan of Kraftwerk? I actually really like Kraftwerk. I don't know why. I just do. I find their music really rather compelling. And so this whole chance thing means that you have a chord that may occur, and it's just a chord. It doesn't have a context. It doesn't have a chord that precedes it. It doesn't have a chord that is antecedent to the chord. It's just a chord, and then another chord, and then you have notes that also are out of their context. You could argue that because it's chance music, or the musicological term is aleatoric music, chance music, that it therefore doesn't make any sense, and it may as well just be somebody throwing tennis balls and golf balls at the inside of a piano. And as soon as somebody made that argument and said, hey, you may as well just go and take the lid off a piano and lob some tennis balls and golf balls and cricket balls and baseballs at the inside of a piano to see what sounds you get. And you know what? Somebody thought, you know what? That's actually a very good idea. Why don't we do that? And so somebody did. And when they did that, the whole concept of the prepared piano was created. And you do get great chance music. Chick Corea wrote a really fantastic prepared piano piece, which is called Who's Inside the Piano? And it's great. It's really, really good. He combines, kind of like dropping ping pong balls onto the inside of the piano with him plucking and strumming and finding harmonic resonant nodes on strings, and playing the inside of the piano percussively, with actually playing the keys traditionally as well. And so the contrast was amazing. And he just like spontaneously composed this thing just out of, okay, I have no idea what string this ping pong ball is going to hit, but I'm going to lob it. I'm going to keep on throwing this ping pong ball and let it bounce off the lid and come back to me. And I keep catching it and I keep throwing it. I don't know what it's going to hit. So there is that element of chance. And so if you take the chord changes of I don't know, um, Hey Joe, for example, by Hendrix. And then you take his guitar solo over those changes and you reverse the guitar solo. You literally reverse the audio, play it backwards. You'll find that there are some notes that work, some notes that don't, or some notes that sound more tense than others. And so that in itself can open up a new idea of intervallic relationships between chords and notes that you can then create a new framework for something new out of. So you could take those chord changes of Hey Joe, the guitar solo reversed, and then you could take the notes of that guitar solo and then you could invert them. So, kind of not just played backwards, so it's not just retrograde, but it's also upside down. So it's inverted, so where pitch goes up, you go down. Where pitch goes down, you go up. And you see what you come out with. And then maybe you try putting those three elements together and see if you can create a brand new Jimi Hendrix arrangement of Jimi Hendrix's Hey Joe. That could be quite interesting. For sure. And you could end up with something that kind of different juxtapositions, different points of the piece work really well, and some bits that are just a little bit of a train wreck. But that's kind of the chance element of the music. And that's all kind of part of music making in that context. So Music Master says, so any single note by itself is never wrong, but it can be wrong in the context of what came before and what comes after, right? That depends. That depends. It depends upon your definition musicologically of wrong, which is what Victor Wooten was challenging. He was challenging the concept of there is no wrong. There is consonance and there is dissonance. And this is a spectrum. It used to be that when we talked about consonance and dissonance, it was either one or the other. But actually, real music that everybody enjoys the most, it is actually this combination of tension and release, of consonance, which is the release, and the dissonance, which is the tension, that makes music go. It's the petrol, the gasoline, the diesel, the EV charge that you put into your car to make it move forward. Right? So you always have this constant tension and release going on. You have this in the basic building blocks of music, like a 2-5-1. Okay, so secondary dominant, except I'm not playing it as dominant. So secondary dominant on chord 2, that note does not belong in the key of C major, so that in itself provides tension. And you've got a tritone. There's another tritone, loaded with tension. The tritone is probably the most tense interval that there is, right? So, and now I resolve that tension. I could keep going and add layers of tension until it becomes completely unbearable to the human ear, to the human mind. But then you kind of get into that point of, okay, this is no longer musical. And so the best way to make music work is to have that constant tension between, that constant back and forth between consonance and dissonance. You got to have a little bit of dissonance to make the consonants sound good. Consonance on its own sounds completely saccharine. It's nothing. It's boring. It's bland. It's like wearing a beige t-shirt. If you wear a beige t-shirt all the time, or you wear like washed out black corduroys with or gray corduroys with a gray t-shirt, it's kind of bland. It doesn't say anything. Whereas if you also where those two items, the gray corduroys, the gray t-shirt, and then you put on a bright neon green jacket, now you're saying something. And now you've got juxtaposition. Right? So now you've got that tension. The neon green jacket doesn't go with the gray. It makes the gray look weird. Or it's just too loud for the gray. Right? So that's kind of like serious tension against something that's very, very consonant. And so the thing that we need to do as musicians is find how much tension, or to use a culinary term, how much spice we like in our music. So do you know, how much spice do you like in your food? How much spice can you tolerate? Can you, on the scale of spices, can you go up to level 7 or level 8 of spices? Or are you much more comfortable with like a number 1 or a number 2, where there's a little bit of tension, there's like plenty of consonants with a little bit of dissonance thrown in, and for this, I'm kind of talking, if I take those two 5/1s, and if I add a flat 9 to this 2, and a flat 5 to this dominant, and then maybe we take the C major and turn that into a C major 7 sharp 11. So we're going there, that's where I was going. So So 2, 5, 1. It's still the same thing, right? It just has a lot more spice to it, a lot more tension. So whatever style of music you're playing in, there really isn't a wrong note. There's just a note that is more dissonant than the context may actually allow, or the context may actually, it may not be suited to. So if you are playing something, if you're playing a piece of music that is kind of, number 1 or 0.5 on the spice scale, so I'm thinking kind of maybe very early Dolly Parton. Her songs were kind of I'm not saying that they were bland or tasteless, but what I am saying is that there wasn't a lot of spice to them. There wasn't a lot of dissonance. A lot of consonants and little flecks, tiny, tiny little microscopic flecks of dissonance here and there. But if you then superimpose on top of that, a late period John Coltrane tenor saxophone solo, it's not going to fit. It's not going to sound right. It's going to sound wrong because the two things are out of context with each other. But you can make the late period Coltrane saxophone solo fit an early Dolly Parton song, even though they are stylistically and completely opposed to each other. You've got like freeform avant-garde jazz over here, and kind of her early form country pop songs. So the two things don't really fit, and so the extreme dissonance and tension and spice of late Coltrane played at a bewildering speed is not necessarily going to fit particularly well into that kind of country pop kind of vein, but it can be made to fit. With a little bit of thought, can be made to fit. Those spiced notes can be made to fit. However, it's about what is appropriate. So there is no such thing as a wrong note. There is only notes that fit better than others into the context. So, in any form of music, you are free to improvise with any notes. And Victor Wooten demonstrated that beautifully at that bass day. He basically had Neil Zaza basically strummed this G7 funky strumming pattern G7. And then he just started playing a G. It fits. Then he started playing an A flat. That's pretty tense. Then he started playing an A. And he just started moving up chromatically until he ended up on F sharp. And he stayed on that F sharp for quite a while. You know, the A flat and the F sharp, those are probably the two things that are most dissonant, most tense. And so, you know, your ear wants to resolve those tensions, wants to take you from dissonance to consonance. That's kind of how our brains are wired, especially in the Western world. That's kind of how our ears are trained. And so he said the secret is getting from the extreme tension back to the consonants, because that's where you need to land. You need to land whatever you're playing. And that's the key. And that's why something like a reversed Hendrix solo over chords going in the correct direction, not reversed, sometimes the notes will fit and sometimes they won't, because some of the notes that he would be using to improvise would fit over a different set of chord changes, the reversed chord changes. And so sometimes they'll fit, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll sound a little spicy, sometimes they'll sound very consonant, sometimes they'll just sound darned out of tune. But yeah, I've kind of labored it a bit, but hopefully you get the point. There is no wrong note. It's just different degrees of tension and what is going to fit the genre that you're working in best. And I don't think it's about accepted norms, because music evolves because people push at the boundaries of accepted norms. You know, bebop happened because people like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker pushed at the boundaries harmonically, rhythmically, and tempo-wise at the conventions of the time, which was Tin Pan Alley swing music. You know, that's what they grew up listening to. That's what they grew up playing. That's where they had their professional starts. They started pushing against those conventions. We want to add more spice. This is great, but it's too bland. We want to add more spice. And so that's how bebop comes about. And this is great. And then, you know, after bebop, you get two things happen. One, there's a group of people that go, we still want to have more spice. And then there's another group of people that go, actually, we want to have less. We want to have more chilled spice. Not aggressive spice, but chilled spice. We still want the spice, but we want it chilled, relaxed. This is where you get the cool school and modal jazz and that kind of thing. Early Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, all of that. That record is right in that ballpark. So, you know, it's not about accepted norms. It's about, you know, how do you make things fit? How do you add spice to your food in order to grow your palate? Right? And so you add a little bit of spice. You get used to that spice. And then you go, you know what? I want to add a little bit more spice. And so you go up through the degrees of scale. You don't just go from, you know, 1 spice all the way to an 8 spice meal in the same setting. In the same sitting. You don't, because you immediately reject it. If you're used to Dolly Parton music and you're used to that kind of you know, the music that works in that framework, so if you're used to really very consonant music with just little hints of spice here and there, you know, and I'm thinking Dolly Parton's recording of I Will Always Love You, and the way she recorded that. There's not a whole lot of spice. There's not a whole lot of spice in it. It has a little bit of flavor, but for the most part, it doesn't have a lot. So I wouldn't recommend that you immediately then, having listened to that song, go and listen to A Love Supreme by Coltrane. Or the My Favorite Things record, because you're not ready for it yet. You got to prepare yourself for that. because it's a different language. You've got to prepare yourself for, it's a different kind of world, food-wise, to continue the metaphor, but also language-wise. There's a lot of language that exists in that context that doesn't exist in Dolly Parton's music. But you can make the two meet. Perfectly possible to make the two meet. You've just got to offset the juxtaposition. So you've got the tension and the release. So I'm going to give you one really good example of this. Diana Krall, the Canadian jazz pianist vocalist. She is a wonderful piano player. She's a terrific singer. But she did a cover of Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are, which, by the way, find it on YouTube and check it out. It's glorious. But the one you want to find is the one which is on the record, which is the one that has Michael Brecker's tenor saxophone solo. Michael Brecker could play extreme spice, but he could also play pop with exactly the same temperament, with exactly the same skill. And so what he does in that solo, it's beautifully lyrical and melodic, which is what you want for the song, because the song is about loving somebody as they are. It's about accepting somebody and loving them just the way they are. So you want something that's nice and romantic, which is exactly what Michael goes for. However, there's a point where the chord is an F7, and he plays a B7. He plays a B7 flat 9 arpeggio over the top of that chord. It's a tritone. But the F7 is leading to B flat major 7. And so when he plays that, it's spicy in the context of the pop song, but he lands it. He resolves it onto the third of the chord. And he sticks the landing. Like, it goes off a little bit, goes a little bit spicy, then he lands it perfectly. Michael Brecker was the undisputed master of doing that. And so basically the notes, technically they are wrong, as in they are not from the F7 chord. It's not. He doesn't play that. He plays this. In fact, he plays this. He plays a little chromatic enclosure. So he sticks the landing perfectly. But those notes don't belong. There's the F for reference. And so it fits, even though they are wrong technically, because they don't belong to the F7 chord. So technically they are wrong, but they work because it's dissonance resolving to consonance. But Just Bob, that was an absolute belter of a question. Absolute belter of a question. So thank you very much for asking it, because it's actually a subject I have actually wanted to explore and talk about a little bit more. So you kind of anticipated that, so I appreciate that. Bob says, tension is like trying to answer your significant other's question about how an outfit makes her look without, Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is. It's you got to stick the landing, right? So you've got to be truthful, but you got to stick the landing by saying, yeah. So you stick the landing. So that she still feels good about herself, and she still feels good about the garment that she's wearing, the dress that she's wearing, whatever it might be. Even if you don't actually think it does look good. But you want her to feel good about herself in that garment, but you also want to be truthful. It's a hard little line to tread. I've had to do that with my wife a lot over the last 19 years. So yeah, it really is. And so it is about sticking the landing. Doesn't matter if your notes as you get there are wrong. You know, it's how you stick the landing. So it's how you start the phrase, how you end the phrase, but whatever you do in the middle, you can do whatever you want. There's no wrong notes. I think Zappa was good at pissing theorists off. Actually, I don't think he was. I think theorists actually learned from Zappa. Because I mean, he knew more than most, actually. And actually, Zappa was, I think, the master at what we're talking about here. He was the master of making a lot of dissonance fit into a consonantal framework. That's actually why I really like his music, because he, you know, it's not just melodic dissonance, it's not just harmonic dissonance, it's rhythmic dissonance. You know, playing something in 1916, for example, or 1516. Yeah, let's have Vinnie Colaiuta lay down this funky groove that's got a backbeat to it, but it's 1916. It's not 4/4, it's 1916. It's like 4/4 with 3/16 notes tacked onto the end of it. But Vinnie makes that funky as fudge. He really does. He makes it incredibly funky. And so that's Zappa's music all over. It's kind of like ridiculously complicated, ridiculously layered with spices and tensions, and yet it's all within a consonantal framework. And it all fits together really, really well. All right, so we got 6-7 minutes left of this. And it is Ziggy's meetup after, it's actually an hour after this show. So we will finish at 0100 UK time. And then Ziggy's meetup will start at 0200 UK time. So that's going to be 9 Eastern for those of you in the United States. And for those of you in Central Europe, that is going to be like 3 o'clock in the morning that's going to start. So, and if you happen to be in South Africa, that's going to be at 6 a.m. So it will be, you know, get up and have your breakfast and be in the meetup for that. All right, so I think we will, I'm going to just do one little check to see if we got anything else in here. Dave says, what I like about the new indie music is that I disregard the accepted norm from songs in the past. However, it disregards the accepted norms from songs in the past. However, still restricted to the accepted music of the past. Yeah, and this is the interesting thing, is Western music has been using the exact equal temperament, major minor tonal system for pretty much almost 300 years. When you think about the fact that, you know, A equals 440 wasn't really settled on until the 1850s, when that was finally resolved. But, you know, equal temperament was kind of the new thing when Bach wrote his 48 Preludes and Fugues. I mean, that whole work, 48 Preludes and Fugues, was designed to celebrate equal temperament. And the extraordinary breakthrough that was. Thank you, Pythagoras, and a whole bunch of other great mathematicians for kind of working that out. Well, I was going somewhere with that thought. So Western music has been using this system for over 300 years. And there's been a heck of a lot of innovation that has taken place within that framework. Isn't it absolutely bonkers? That even when you take extreme free-form improvisation, and you take the music of Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg at the far edge of the spicy scale, it's all within the same framework as the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, Handel, and the other Baroque and medieval composers like William Byrd, who was one of the great composers of the medieval period. But it's all within the same framework. Major, minor, equal temperament. So it's like 500 years worth of musical innovation and development and new discoveries, all within that context. And I'm just watching the replay of myself do this. It looks like I'm trying to adjudicate a field goal in Aussie rules football, because that's kind of what they do. It's like goal. That's what the umpires do, by the way. So isn't it amazing that maybe, even though we've had this framework, maybe we still haven't fully mined to the very end of it yet, of the possibilities that there are with these 12 semitones. I mean, we're kind of pushing a little bit at that now. You know, there are people that are pushing at that a little bit now. People like Jacob Collier, for example, who is starting to, to think about using other temperaments, such as just intonation, but within the Western major minor framework, to create something new. So maybe we haven't quite got to the end of this thing yet. And maybe, who knows, maybe it's, there's another 100, 150 years before we go, I think we might have done this whole major minor equal temperament thing to death. What do you think? And Just Bob says, notes are like in night numbers, infinity. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe music is like pie. And I don't mean steak pie, although I do like myself some Aberdeen Angus steak pie for sure. But I mean the mathematical number, pi, which has infinite decimal positions. Maybe that's the analogy, and that just rounds this whole thing off perfectly, this whole discussion. Much food for much thought, and really that was a whole lot of songwriting, but not necessarily simplified. Because we kind of delved off into a little bit of explorative musicology, which, by the way, that is the subject that was my study for musicology, was explorative musicology. That's kind of what I wrote about, kind of like, how are we pioneering? That's kind of, and what are the new pioneering musical thoughts? That's what I did for my thesis. So there you go. I do have, as you've probably noticed, some difficulty with keeping within the simplified remit of this show. And I don't have Jonny Gibe here to reel me in. So anyway, just to make one final little announcement here. Next week, over the course of next week, I will be hammering out the details of the Halloween Songwriting Challenge for 2025 with my good friend Rich Cresswell, and then the two of us will be making an announcement show on a Songwriting Simplified, probably next week or the week after. And that will be when we make that announcement, that'll be the contest open, and you can get started to work on your piece. We are probably going to give you 5 or 6 weeks to work on your piece. And then the closing show, or the show where the winner is announced, will probably be on October 29th. because that's the nearest Wednesday show to Halloween this year. So it'll be the 29th, and the closing date will be the Sunday before that. So you have time. But don't get started on the work just yet. Just be thinking kind of scary musical concepts between now and when we announce what the criteria is going to be. It's going to be awesome this year. And once again, I want to make a big shout out to Rich for sponsoring this thing yet again. And just to remind you, one of the things he has already stated publicly is that anyone who enters the contest and publishes their piece to a platform where the music can be purchased, he will buy it. So if you enter, you put your song up on Bandcamp, for example, and you charge whatever you want to charge for it, he will buy it. He has already promised to do that. So that should give you some extra incentive to enter. All right. That's us done. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me tonight. And we will be back on Sunday for more Studio One madness with Sunday Night Live, where we will be talking Studio One. So have your Studio One recording, mixing, mastering questions available for that. That's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to it. And I will see you folks then. So I will bid you a very good night. Good night.